I was very confident of the airplane and confident that I would never get hit. Never. This is what we had been training for. There was no fear. It was all pumped up.
Since 1919 and every year onwards, Canadians have observed a moment of silence on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Canadians take this time for an uninterrupted moment to reflect on the sacrifice of the over 118,000 Canadians who have served this country in uniform and who have paid the ultimate price to defend this country since Confederation. More than 66,000 Canadians died in the First World War, and more than 45,000 Canadians died in the Second World War. In the case of the Second World War, every single person who served this country volunteered for King and Country, volunteered to fight for our flag. Although sacrifice and bravery on such a scale is hard to comprehend, it's important to remember that people like the men who stormed the beaches of Normandy and who fought at Vimy Ridge live amongst us today. Over 40,000 Canadians served this country in the war in Afghanistan between 2001 and 2011. 158 Canadians died in Afghanistan serving this country, our country. As the years go by and as the country undergoes rapid transformation, becoming unrecognizable from the one that sent those boys across the Atlantic to fight for this country all those years ago, it's arguably more important now than ever before for us as Canadians to never forget the bravery and sacrifice that so many Canadians displayed for this country. At cemeteries across Canada and in the battlefields of Europe, you will find simple headstones with a maple leaf on top, marking the place where a Canadian hero has been laid to rest. At Mount Pleasant Cemetery, you'll find stones marking the Canadian heroes who gave up their lives in the First World War, such as David Lamb, John Dixon, and 18-year-old Samuel Shears, who all gave up their lives fighting for this country. These men were never able to come home and to tell their story, but luckily we are able and have the privilege to be able to speak with a Canadian hero who did come home. Let me introduce you to Honourary Lieutenant General Richard Rohmer, Distinguished Flying Cross from Hamilton, Ontario. In 1942, on his 18th birthday, Richard Rohmer immediately volunteered to serve his country and to become a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. By the age of 20, Rohmer was flying several air reconnaissance missions over the English Channel and into occupied France every day as a member of the Canadian 430 Squadron. On D-Day, Rohmer was flying over the beaches as Canadians laid down their lives to liberate Europe in the single largest amphibious assault the world has ever seen. By the age of 21, Richard Rohmer had successfully completed over 130 missions in the war, and when he returned home, his next mission was to build this country, to serve his community and his country for the rest of his life. Rohmer is a member of Canada's greatest generation, the definition of a living legend. This is his story. Lieutenant General Richard Rohmer, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you.
It's an opportunity that I wouldn't miss for the world.
Well, you know, there's just so much I'd like to get into and be able to discuss with you, and it's kind of tough to know where to start. But why don't we start in 1942 on your 18th birthday, when you volunteered to join the war and to fight for this country, to join the Royal Canadian Air Force. Take me through that. Why did you feel so compelled to volunteer?
I always wanted to fly airplanes. That was always been my ambition, and I wanted to fulfill it. So the place to go, I was in London, Ontario, repairing airplanes. And I went to the recruiting office and passed all the exams, physical and otherwise. And on my 18th birthday, I walked in, put the uniform on, and I was in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And I've been there ever since, and I'm still there because I am the Honorary Lieutenant General of the Armed Forces.
Do you think today that Canadians of the younger generation would have been so willing to serve this country in a time of war? Do you think that same kind of quality of bravery exists in the younger generation you see?
That's a very difficult question to answer because the whole world has changed. We're going to let in 500,000 people into this country this year alone. It's absolutely interesting that we're doing that. And so if you're going to ask all those people if they'd be prepared to fight for Canada, I probably wouldn't get any answer whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how it'll all play out. Let me ask you, did you know you would end up being a reconnaissance pilot during your training in Canada, or was your role known to you when you made it to England in that training?
It wasn't made until I had been there for some time. When I arrived in England, after going through the U-boat attacks, when we did, it was quite something. I hadn't been designated to bombers or fighters or whatever. I managed to talk my way into fighters, and someone had turned up at a place, an airfield I was at, with a Mustang 1 airplane. And they talked to me about flying that machine, and I was really taken with it as a fighting airplane. So I switched to training to be a person who would go and look for the enemy and the enemy's guns or tanks or whatever at low level, and to be able to tell the army where they were. Reconnaissance was the name of the game. So I became a fighter reconnaissance trainee, got through that all right, joined the squadron 430 that flew the Mustang, and that was our job. The only problem with the job was that you had to do it low level, and people were firing at you in a way that you could see every time.
I want to get into that, but you touched on this briefly, the Atlantic crossing from Canada just to get to England and what it was like having to cross the Atlantic and deal with U-boats. I mean, tell me about what that was like, just getting to England in the first place.
Well, the scariest 10 days I've ever had in my life. Quite apart from getting shot at in an airplane. But I got on a tramp steamer called the Torhead in Halifax Harbor in April of '42. There were 6 of us on board. I was the senior Air Force person at 19. In any event, off we started. But as soon as we got out of the harbor, the U-boats were waiting for us. And they hit, I think it was 8 or 10 of our ships in a convoy of about 60 people. The convoy number was 231. It was written about by all kinds of people, and it was really scary. I got on the bridge with the captain. It was a little man about 70 years old, white hair, and I stayed with him as the senior person during the whole trip across and watched the torpedoes going by. They all went by, because if you got hit in those days in a steamer, freighter, that would be the end. There was no way of saving you, because it was the ice water, you'd be dead in no time. So in any event, we didn't get hit. And it was a scary 10 days, I can tell you. The first 8 days were just really something. But I was there with the captain all the time, and got through it, but scary is the word.
I can imagine. I mean, it's incredible that there was so much danger just getting to the war itself.
Yeah.
Couldn't just show up and get going.
No.
But when you did, so you got to England, you were placed in the 430 Squadron, you came to grips with the Mustang, that fighter jet. Take us through what that first mission you went on was. You did 135 missions in the war, but let's go to number 1. The first time you got in the cockpit and you knew you were going over to take photographs and do reconnaissance over France. What was that feeling like, sitting in the cockpit?
It was scary, but it wasn't, I was never afraid. I was very confident of the airplane and confident that I would never get hit. Never. And that's the way you had to approach getting into the airplane, turning it on, going with the one or two other airplanes with you, and you know you're going to get shot at. But it isn't a fear quotient. It's a, you have to do it, let's get it over with and do it. And that's the way I went with my 135 missions. I had to do it that way.
At any time when you were flying and the German anti-aircraft guns were coming at you, did it ever cross your mind to say, boy, I wish I never did this?
No, I've never had that wish. I always had the view that it would never happen to me. And one day, I'm well into French territory, enemy territory, and I had the biggest hole appeared automatically in the middle of my left wing. I'm down low. So I got a direct hit, but the thing was, most of it went through the wing, didn't hit the petrol or anything of that kind. I was able to fly the airplane, but I can tell you it got my attention, for sure. That's the only time I got hit. Lots of stuff going by me all the time. In fact, I had a reputation for being dumb enough to not care that much, and little stories here and there. So I had fear from the point of view that from time to time I got scared enough with the stuff coming at me that I would put my head right down below the level of the machinery just to see if I could avoid the hit. Of course, it was stupid, but automatic. I just would duck down here until it was all over.
So I'm sure that many of the people in your squadron didn't make it home.
That's correct.
And it was obviously an incredibly dangerous role to be a reconnaissance pilot.
Big time, big time. And I had the reputation that I would bring my airplane back and crump it on the field and walk away from it, and that was okay because that's exactly what was happening. And I managed to survive.
Incredible.
And with a couple of major incidents that were never reported.
Yes.
One of them is that I caught Field Marshal Rommel. I didn't know who it was, but I caught him at low level, and I was not permitted to shoot up his car. It was a big German top-down car, 2 men in the front, 3 in the back. But I was not permitted to shoot him up. I didn't know who it was. So what I did was I called the group control center on the radio who knew where there were Spitfires. They sent a Spitfire in, followed this car, shot it up, and the man in the front right seat was Rommel, the great general. And he was very badly injured as a result. And that didn't come out till later. But nobody cared, you know, it was a Canadian. They didn't matter a damn. So that changed the face of the war because he was out of the war. And the second thing had to do with the major event was I used to range artillery guns, long-range artillery guns, by talking to the people running the gun, and when they would fire with big shells, I would then change the fire location, left or right, 100 yards or whatever, and fix it. And so when the time came for a major shoot at the end of the war in November, the wing commander chose me to do it, and I got it done, and I knocked the bridges down at a place called Venlo in Holland. And as it happened, the Germans who were heavily into Holland, as we know, the Germans did exactly what the big brains at headquarters thought might happen. When the time came, they surrendered, and on May the 5th, the war ended because of my bridge being hit. They had no way of getting back to Germany, and so they came to Wageningen, is the name of the town, and surrendered to the Canadian generals, and because I had knocked bridges down. That's it. Two of them. Not bad.
You touched on something there when you were discussing the fact that you played a key role in taking out Field Marshal Rommel. I mean, I want to get into that too, but you said something I thought was of note, that people didn't really care because it was a Canadian who did it, and Canadians aren't getting, Canadians didn't get the recognition that you feel they deserved.
That's right.
Tell me about that.
Well, both incidents came to light after the war was finished, and they're fully documented now. But at the time, I had no presence. The fact that I had done this really wasn't known until after the war, and so there wasn't any big to-do about it at all. But I've completed several resumes of exactly what happened, and I think there may be something coming soon in that regard, even though it's a long time ago.
Well, we'll be looking out for it.
Well, I've got it. If anybody has to make it happen, it is yours truly. I know how to do it now.
Yeah. You didn't know that you were flying over Field Marshal Rommel at the time, but you knew that it was something important, and that you had noticed something was big was happening on the ground, and you explained what that was like. But in your book, generally speaking, your autobiography, I noticed that you had a lot of respect for Rommel's ability in the battlefield.
Oh, indeed.
And a general respect for the enemy. Explain that a little bit. Explain that mindset.
Well, it's the kind of mindset that I had. I don't know how I developed it, but the reality was these were people who were extremely intelligent, quite capable, great leaders, and I was not permitted to shoot them up, and I was just well pleased because I wasn't of the kind that would like to get my gun sights on a car and then kill 2 or 3 or 4 people. I wasn't fixed for that. So I wasn't permitted to do it either, and so that suited me very well. Simple as that.
Yeah. Well, I want to spend some time talking about D-Day.
Well, D-Day, we finally knew where the landing was going to be. And 2 of us went out from England and across. It was a very exciting moment because this is what we had been training for. There was no fear. It was all pumped up. And my trip across was very simple. I was a number 2, flying on was a fellow called Jack Taylor, and we got over to the beach sector, and there was a wall of cloud right sitting over the beach, so that we had to go under the wall and down to about 500 feet to get through this, which is what we did. People were firing at us in the usual way. Then we went down to Caen, which is the big town, to do a reconnaissance, came back up the Orne River, and there was a big bridge there that the British had landed gliders filled with troops in. They were fighting that battle at the moment. Then up and down the beach, back and forth, on a reconnaissance basis, also looking for any fighters that might be coming to attempt to shoot up people on the beach. And there weren't any, because we had, between the British and the Canadians and the Americans, the fighters had fundamentally, from the German point of view, disappeared. And then at that point, I going up and down the beach, two of us, and I looked at my fuel gauge and it said 0. So, because I had been flying on this other man, not really paying attention to my petrol. And so I said to my number one, time to get home. So we left and went up to England, and I landed at Thorney Island. Petrol ran out when I touched down, just barely made. But the concentration on what was happening there outside the airplane was total, which is the reason I almost lost myself in terms of running out of fuel. But I made it all right.
Yeah. And you went back later on the
I
day.
went back the same day. Oh, well.
Wow, yeah.
I got fuel, no problem, in the P-51, and back to base, got rebriefed again for a new mission, which I was leading this time. So it was a full day, and I did, I think, 2 more. 1 more there, and then 2 more the next day. It was keep going.
And you can remember what it was like that day? And
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. It was a great exercise in euphoria, because we were doing what we've been trained to do, and we were doing it well. And yeah, it was scary from time to time, but the reality was we were making progress on the ground, which was our job to help them, and we did.
And from the sky on that day, could you feel like the invasion was working? Could you see it making its progress? And could you feel like you guys were winning the day?
When we got back to base, we were briefed as to how the armies, British, Canadian, American, were doing on the ground. That's when we could tell we were making some real progress. And we added that into what we could see when we were flying our reconnaissance. So we could tell that we were making good progress indeed. I'm in a little airplane, and I'm totally concentrating with 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever people, and that's my world. And if it's going bad for me, I can tell, or if it's going good, I can tell. And getting back and forth 135 times is quite something.
Oh, certainly.
And I never thought about it very much. The reality was, from time to time, I got scared big time. But the reality was I would stick my head below the level of the cockpit and keep going. Hard to put it all into words.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Was there a sense amongst your squadron and amongst people involved in the war that they were involved in something very special? Did you guys feel like you were in history?
Oh yeah, no question about that. And in a sense, we had to have that kind of feeling. And overall, particularly after we moved over to France, to our first airfield there, we called B8. The engineers had made an airstrip for us, and we moved over on June the 28th, shortly after D-Day. And we operated from there, very close to the front lines. And the matter of fact, some of my ashes are going to be at that airfield, because the family who are there, their name is Jean. They picked up the farmhouse, huge farmhouse after the war where their airstrip was, and we used part of their house for our waiting rooms and that kind of thing. And so we have remained in close contact with the Joseph family. So that's the plan at the moment. It may come off. I haven't decided yet.
I'm wondering if you would be able to explain to our audience what medals you've received. You're one of the most decorated Canadian citizens. And could you go through what's on your shirt there for us?
No, I won't do that, but I'll tell you that one of my collar is the Order of Canada. It's special, and I have the Distinguished Flying Cross, which was awarded by the then King. And the new King, by the way, is an old friend of mine, the King Charles. We had, that's another story. And the matter of decorations are usually those that are handled in relation to particular battles and campaigns and so forth. So about 6 of mine are special, and the rest of them, there are about 20 of them, are routine. So that's all I can say about the medals. I'm very pleased to have them, and very honored indeed. And I wear them whenever it's appropriate.
Certainly. Stepping away from the war, I wonder if you could tell us what the proudest moment in your life has been.
Proudest moment in my life in terms of personal achievement was the first time I flew an airplane by myself in the Air Force. And that was an accomplishment that one had to build on. And I was able to build on it very successfully because I've carried virtually every rank in the Air Force off and on. And it's just been very fortunate because that's what I wanted to do. The principal thing in my life was to fly airplanes. And I built all the other professions, like the law and authoring books and so forth. All of them sort of came together. So I was very lucky.
You've spent your entire life serving Canada. You were in the war, of course, and when you came back, you were a politician. You've served your community and your country in various roles, and was the chief of the reserves. And you've just you've constantly been serving this country. Where did that sense of public duty come from, you think?
I spent my life seizing opportunities. A lot of people don't do that. If I've seen an opportunity going by that I could participate in some activity, like building the CN Tower, and the hearings there, and any number of things, I've always gone after the opportunity. So in the end result, I've had about 6 professions going all at the same time with some degree of success. Whether it was writing books or flying or business, a whole slew of things. But if there's one quality that I've been fortunate enough, I've been able to see an opportunity, and even if I wasn't really familiar with the field, if I could see that something could be done in there to achieve something different, I would go and try to do it. And I've done that, even though how old am I now? I'm very old.
You've seen a lot in this country.
Yeah.
Seen the country through the Depression, through the war. You played a role in building this country. I wonder what someone with your experience thinks about our country today and where we're going to be in 25 years. Where do you see Canada going and being in the next 25 or 50 years?
I don't think I've ever looked at Canada from that point of view. I may have in some of my books, some of my fiction books. Writing fiction books successfully gives you a chance to express opinions that you wouldn't otherwise. And I think that many of the things that I've written, many of the books that I've written have encompassed my hope for the future, which is always an extremely positive about Canada. Sometimes it gets weakened badly, but in the end result, my faith in the country is being stretched by the inability of the people of Canada to really realize that the big monster to the north of us, called Russia, is a major threat. And I've been pushing that one, I know it's a policy matter, but the reality is the Russians are in the high Arctic, and they are building military stations, and they're doing it heavily, and they're just on the other side of the Northwest Passage. And I've been trying in my own way to ring the alarm bell, saying we should be really concentrating our defenses, Air Force particularly, in the area of the Northwest Passage, and we should be doing it now. My message has fallen on deaf ears and eyes, but that's the way life goes.
We'll do our best to try and get that message out there as much as we can.
Well, it's very important right now.
And one thing I've really been looking forward to asking you, being someone who has, as we've discussed, done so much service to this country and put your life on the line for this country. You know, as you said at the beginning of this, we're bringing in a lot of new people into Canada, and a lot of people are coming into this country. And I'd like to know from your perspective, it's a tough question, I can't answer it myself, I wish I could, but I struggle to at least. In your mind, what does it mean to be a Canadian?
It means to be, to me it's very simple. To me it means to be part of a country that is not a threat to anybody, that is a little dragging its feet in terms of protecting itself. It's the, when I do a lot of talking and speaking, and I said, this is the finest country in the world in which to live. We're letting too many people in from time to time. But the reality is, we are not a power, but we are a presence, and we're letting people in here by the high numbers of 500,000 a year. I don't know how we're going to do that. But the reality, to be a Canadian is a matter of great pride for me. And this is the safest country that I know to be a citizen and a participating citizen to the best of one's ability. It's the finest country in the world in which to live right now.
How can we as Canadians honor your sacrifice and the sacrifice of all the Canadians that fought in the First World War and Second World War when everyone who survived has left?
All you can do is to do what we do on Remembrance Day. A little bit of a ceremony. I built the wall at Queen's Park over 10 years ago. I'm going to be there again for that ceremony with the Premier. Whether he knows or likes it or not, I will be there with him. All we can do is to remember that there were sacrifices made, and how important it was for us to participate in fighting the Germans and all the other enemies we've had. And so Remembrance Day is important.
The last question I have for you, I wanted to ask this question at the end, but what's the secret to living to be 100 years old? Do you have any secret?
Yes, I do.
All right, what is it?
Keep breathing. I did not expect to get to be 100. I'm not there quite yet, but I've had a wonderful life, a wonderful family, a wonderful wife and kids, and successes in many fields. So I just think that I'm blessed. But I don't worry about dying. That's not a problem for me at all. And that is one of the things that the vacuum between my ears doesn't worry me about departing, which I have to do sometime soon. But the reality is I've been very, very fortunate, facing death hundreds of times and still here and to be able to talk with you about it. Great country in which to live.
Lieutenant General Richard Rohmer, thank you so much. This has been an honor to be able to speak with you.
My privilege to be able to speak with you.